The Marvel Snap devs just nerfed every tier 1 deck in the entire game. In my most recent tier list, I had 3 decks in tier 1. They were Loki, Annihilus Bounce, and Thanos Blob. All 3 of those decks have received 1 or more nerfs in this most recent OTA. Let's start with what is likely to be the biggest, and that is the change to Werewolf by Night. Going from a 3/3 to a 4/4 is quite a significant debuff in terms of where it is most commonly played. Werewolf tends to see play in decks like Loki and Annihilus Bounce, where it is an early card that scales late. However, going to 4 means it conflicts with, the obvious card Loki, but also with cards like, say, Sentry, or the plays that you like to make with Falcon and Beast that tend to happen on the turn 4, turn 5 part of the game. I'm not saying this card is going to be completely terrible now, but it is a pretty decent change to a card. Now, he's still probably going to be above rate in a lot of these decks. Loki especially, I think, is probably priced into playing him, because Loki is such a deck that is so awkward in mirrors that it tends to default towards playing cards that are scaling threats rather than just big threats on their own. So for example, if you are playing a werewolf into a Loki and your opponent is playing something like a devil dinosaur, you are much happier getting that devil dinosaur than your opponent is getting the werewolf. This is why a lot of Loki threats have tended to be cards like Angela and Werewolf, rather than cards like Devil Dinosaur throughout the card's lifespan in the existence of Marvel Snap. That said, I wish we had a better option for Loki. I wish, if Elsa wasn't nerfed, maybe we could try that again? I honestly, truly don't know. But Werewolf, I think, at least in Loki, it is still priced in. And then maybe in the Annihilus Bounce type stuff, we end up playing a Zabu, perhaps, that goes alongside a Shang-Chi, goes alongside a Sentry. Maybe something along those lines ends up working there. That said, I mean, this is a core card, probably the defining card of the entire metagame that is now a full energy worse. And it is also a card that really needs to be played on time already. I kind of do wonder if this might be not necessarily the death knell, but hopefully these lists will have to adapt. That said, when it comes to Loki, I might just play the same exact list and dare other people to adapt instead of me, because yes, it is worse, but also we don't have many better options for where the power in this deck is going to come from. If you're going to run into mirrors, you want your power to come from something that isn't good when they get it, and right now, Werewolf is unfortunately the best option, even at 4 cost, for a card like that. The other incredibly big nerf in this patch is to Professor X. Now, Professor X is just straight up losing 2 power because they said they didn't want him to be around as much as he is around. They grouped him with Galactus in terms of cards that are like, maybe this isn't the best thing you could possibly be doing, but we really don't want it to be a very common strategy. And so for that reason, Professor X is getting just a very harsh power nerf here. This is a big deal. He's losing 2/3 of his power. That's a lot. I'm not saying he's going to end up unplayable, but I do think that a lot of decks that are currently playing Professor X are going to really have to examine if their strategy can actually hold up, because using 5 energy for 1 power is really tough to do. As far as Thanos goes, my first thought is to swap over to the Lockjaw style of Thanos, and I'll have some deck lists on the back end of this video for anyone who wants to see what that might look like a little more in depth. But my thought process is, of all the types of Thanos, Lockjaw Thanos is the one that is most able to support not having Professor X, because it has so many other scam plans, getting ahead, cheating stuff out, and maybe the whole archetype falls apart without him, but I honestly don't think that it will. Many people might argue this is not a card that needed to get nerfed, and I would argue with those people. Black Widow as a 2/1 was part of one of the most dangerous curves in the entire game. When you played a Korg into a Black Widow, into a Beast, that is an incredibly damaging thing to happen to you. And right now, as a 3/3 now, that can't happen anymore, and that is undeniably a good thing. Multiple draw removal effects off of the Black Widow were, I think, a little bit game-breaking. I had a lot of games where I would just be like, all right, well, I stopped so many of the draws from this Thanos deck that I don't even need to worry about a blob getting rid of my Darkhawk. I'm just going to roll those dice. And I think that that is probably a very bad feeling for someone who is packing the counter to my deck, but just wasn't able to draw it because I played Black Widow and Korg too many times. And I think that that is definitely a thing that is worth getting rid of here. The interesting thing for me is, as a 3/3, is Black Widow a better card in Darkhawk decks than Rockslide? When you think about them both in the context of having a Darkhawk, Black Widow is -1 power. They're both 3/3. Black Widow stops 1 draw. Rockslide puts 2 cards in deck, and Black Widow's Widow's Bite is still -1 power. However, her effect is so guaranteed that I tend to think that she's actually a little bit better than Rockslide right now. I'm not really sure how to implement that. I'm gonna default towards playing Rockslide, but I do think that my instincts are telling me she's probably the better 3-drop right now. I'm just not sure if I can trust those instincts 100%, or if there is a reason why I'm still wanting to run Rockslide other than just being afraid of change. The deck that has a real issue with this change is the Annihilus Bounce. The deck that has a real issue with this change is the Annihilus Bounce deck. That is the deck that is going to struggle the most without having that nut draw ability with the Beast, Korg, Black Widow, or really any one drop into Black Widow and Beast was just kind of what you were trying to do. I do think that that deck is likely to stay around in some form. It's just going to need to do a little soul searching. The 1-drop and Beast Core is so strong, but it is really losing some beef here, losing Black Widow and the nerf to Werewolf, which is tough because this is one of my pet decks. It's been a favorite of mine for a while. I really like it, and I really hate that for every nerf Loki seems to take, it seems to take an extra nerf, right? We both lost Werewolf, but also we lost Black Widow, and it's like, I really just wish that they would stop nerfing the viable alternatives to Loki a little bit. It is a little bit frustrating for me because, like, I loved playing that deck. I thought it was better than Loki. Then Blob came out, right? And Blob disproportionately negatively impacts Darkhawk versus Loki. So obviously Loki got a little bit better and the Darkhawk deck got a little bit worse. And now we're getting sort of asymmetric nerfs. Yeah, both of us lose Werewolf, but I think the Bounce deck is actually a little bit more hurt by that. And also, the Bounce deck is now losing Black Widow too. I just... Stop, please, I'm begging you. A certain type of player gets very excited when they see that there's been a buff to Ronan the Accuser. And if you can believe it, there has been more than one buff to Ronan the Accuser. So brace yourselves for that. It has been abundantly clear when comparing Ronan the Accuser with Devil Dinosaur that what Ronan does is just worse. And that is because you, as the player of Devil Dinosaur, have control over how big it is, whereas you do not have control over how big your opponent's hand is, no matter how much you try to with cards like Maximus and Master Mold. Fundamentally, it's easier to understand how big your stuff is going to be than how many cards your opponent is going to have in hand. This is exacerbated by decks like Loki. If people start playing Ronan a lot, well, it's like, all right, well, I'm going to play Loki, dump my entire hand. Thanks for giving me the cards, though. I really appreciate it. And I think for that reason, it's a very safe buff to add some power onto Ronan. He is going to a 5/5, getting an additional 2 power in this OTA. And I honestly, I'll be real with you, I don't expect it to do much. It's still Ronan the Accuser, but I'm at least excited that people will be able to be rewarded for playing with him at this point and not just be told, okay, well, it's worse Devil Dinosaur, it's already not that good. I'm excited that this archetype is getting a little bit of love. I don't want it to get too much love, but I'm excited that it exists. Just make sure you don't play those Maximuses on curve. Maximus might be one of the best 2-cost cards in the game now. A 2/6 is nothing to sneeze at. What I'm kind of wondering about with Maximus is, okay, so if this guy, a lot of people are going to be like, oh, they buff Maximus, they buff Ronan, let's play both together. Here's the thing. What if you just play Maximus? That is a 2/6 on the final turn of the game. That's the kind of card that, you know, a Sarah deck could use really, really well. And I think more importantly than ever, it is crucial for me to remind you, stop tempoing out your Maximuses. I know Dara was playing like a tempo Thanos list that used Maximus in it, but one of the things that you'll notice if you watched him was he was not playing that guy out on turn 3. That was not the thing he was doing. And one of the things that happened to me when I was playing against people playing that deck was a lot of them were playing Maximus on turn 3. Don't do that. This is not a tempo card. You play this at the end of the game or when your opponent already has a full hand. You do not want to draw your opponent cards. Generally speaking, the power spikes that people can get, especially early in the game from seeing more of their cards, it's very, very dangerous to give your opponent all of their options and let them pick the best one early in the game. It's a lot less dangerous to do that later in the game, and it's not dangerous at all to do it on the final turn of the game. That is the Maximus scale. Please, I'm begging y'all, keep that in mind. One other issue this card may have is if you are playing it, it gets incredibly depressing if your Loki opponent gets this from you. That is a 1/6. You are incredibly upset, and so there is some degree of like, okay, it's really, really bad if we're making a deck based entirely on playing efficient bodies, and then our Loki opponent gets to take that deck and play our efficient bodies, but even cheaper. I feel like I've said that sentence probably 50 times in the past month, and then probably 50 times each month before that, thanks Loki. But yeah, this is a card that might have some Loki issues. All right, this is the take I'm going most out on a limb on here, but I kind of think 3/8 Gladiator is just really good. That is a really, really, really big number. It's a very large number for 3 energy. And like, I get it, it's kind of mid, but like each point of power on Gladiator is a bunch of other stuff that it can beat. Every bit of power this card gets, it gets stronger in a real way. I think the main thing holding it back right now is there's a lot of people playing Blob out there, and those Blob Thanos decks are really poor matchups for Gladiator for the most part, but like, play this into Loki, it's a 3/8. It just is. That is a 3/8. You are playing a 3/8 when you play this against a Loki deck. That's really not nothing. Like, that is a very big card. I am excited for big number, small cost. This is basic stuff to me. That said, I mean, yeah, if it's a 3/8 for you, it's a 2/8 for Loki. So I get it. Don't get me wrong. I get it. I'm there. I'm with you. But man, a 3/8 is just a very, very strong body to get. Like, every time Gladiator gets played against me, my thing never lives already. And so I think that like this card might actually legitimately be underrated. I would be a little surprised if it became, well, I guess maybe I wouldn't be that shocked because again, 3/8 is such an efficient body, but I'd be a little surprised if it was like meta, but I would not be surprised to see this card running around. Viper getting nerfed kind of from a 2/3 to a 3/4. They mentioned in the patch notes that this was about targeting the Havoc Viper combo, and like, I'm gonna be real honest with you, I don't think that's worth nerfing. I don't think it's very good. I've lost to it one time, and I've beaten it every other time. It does not strike me as something that's worth putting in your deck or doing. And to the credit of Second Dinner, in the patch notes, they also mentioned, hey, we tested this and it wasn't very good either. But out of an abundance of caution, they have decided to nerf Viper in this specific way. And this is actually a very specific nerf that really only impacts the Havoc type stuff, because when you play Havoc, you lose a piece of energy. And then, of course, you can't actually play the Viper to follow it up on turn 3. So the earliest you could do it is Havoc on 3, then Viper on 4. And that's a lot more of a fair play, because then you both end up having like a pretty similar amount of energy. One of you has a Havoc. It kind of makes the play completely terrible. And to be clear, I kind of thought it was completely terrible already, but their goal of making it completely terrible has definitely been achieved. As far as everything else, though, like, I actually don't hate Viper like this. I don't know why. It sounds weird because like she didn't get enough stats for the increased energy cost, right? Like a 2/3 is better value than a 3/4, but 4 points is meaningful to me for some reason. Like, you're not going to catch me playing Viper anyway. I think part of the reason why she sucks is because she is such a conditional card and is not really worth it. And outside of those cases, you draw her late and you're just like, oh my god, what am I doing here? Why is this card in my deck? And that actually does get more pronounced the more stats she have, the more you actually want to play her. So I just think this is, sure, get rid of the Havoc Viper thing. It wasn't good anyway, but if you think it's just like so anti-fun, yeah, go nuts. Solid nerf. I feel you. This is a good one. Martyr is a 1/5 now, which is kind of compelling, honestly. Like, it's not, the greatest card of all time, but a 1/5 remains a 1/5. Like, we're out here gushing over Maximus at 2/6, and this is 1/5, right? It of course has the natural Killmonger weakness, and of course the text of Martyr, but a 1/5 is nothing to sneeze at, honestly. And it actually does give her a real role as like Ant-Man plus, right? You're filling up your lane already. Okay, if you fill up every lane, this is a 1/5, and that's pretty damn good. And I think that might actually, I think this is good, and I think it's also very, very good, because one of the patterns in this that I've noticed is a lot of balancing to recent cards. And that's not just the nerfs to something like Werewolf, it's buffs to Gladiator and Martyr. These are cards that came out and they were unexciting, and now they are exciting, and maybe we can actually get something done with them. And I think it's good to set the precedent that when a card comes out that's too low on the power scale, they're going to try to buff it. They did it with Lady Deathstrike, they did it with Black Knight, now they're doing it with Martyr and Gladiator. I think that is a good precedent to set. It should help people not feel like their investment in these cards was completely wasted. And now, I mean, I'm not saying Martyr is good, but she has an actual role now. A 1/5 that, if you fill up all the lanes, is 1 point better than Ant-Man. That's a card. Previously, she was not a card. Now, she is a card. And finally, for everyone who collected their Peach Momoko variant from the previous Twitch drops, you can now use the Punisher slightly better. He's a 3/3 that scales up to 3/7 now. It's not amazing, but at least now you can try to get some value out of that Peach Momoko variant from the previous Twitch drops. And by the way, if you're watching this starting on December 20th, which is, you know, yesterday when this video came out, but going until, I believe, January 2nd, there will be further Twitch drops. You can check me out on twitch.tv/KMBestMS. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. So let's talk about decks to play in this new metagame. And I'm not going to talk about, you know, just play the same Loki list, because, you know, you can play the same Loki list. I actually talked to Lambie about this. He said, you know, maybe we cut Mirage for Zabu. Sure, go nuts. If you want to play the same Loki list, be my guest. I don't want to do that. I don't want to show you this stuff. I want to show you something that might actually get a chance to shine. I'm not just going to show you a Loki deck, because at this point, we already know what that looks like. So here is the Leech Darkhawk list that I had on my previous tier list, and I've been feeling pretty good about this list going forward, because the Leech helps you into Loki, and it also helps you into Blob, which are two of the main matchups I do think you'll still encounter. I am willing to adjust this as it goes on, but right now, the main thing that's drawing me towards this list is it's the one that didn't run any cards that got nerfed, right? So the real question then becomes, what do we do with these tech slots? Because there are a lot of tech slots in this list, and I'd like to point out a couple. First is Shadow King. Shadow King is being run right now out of deference to mostly the Loki list and, you know, the Forge bounce list, things like that. You'll find targets for him, but if people were not playing a bunch of Werewolf, and they might not be after the patch, then you might not have the same value out of Shadow King as you previously did. Rogue is in there out of deference to the variety of Miss Marvel decks that you see, the variety of Thanos decks that you see. There's a lot of good ongoings to steal out of that, but, you know, Rogue might not actually be necessary if those decks end up falling down in play rate, although I will say she's also pretty damn good in the mirror. Now, of course, you have a Killmonger in here who is definitely a tech card against Thanos, against Loki. You're trying to hit these specific things, the bounce decks. Like, that's kind of why this deck exists, is that it can reasonably say, I have good cards in all of these matchups. I have the Killmonger against Thanos. I've got, you know, the Rogue against Thanos and other ongoing decks. I've got the Shadow King against the Wolf decks. I've got a bunch of cards that are just good in a bunch of matchups, but will that remain true? That's kind of an open question. I'm not actually sure that will remain true. I'm really interested to find out, but those are the main tech slots and flex slots here. But one other that I want to point out is I kind of think Black Widow might be better than Rockslide here, as both of them are doing kind of the same thing, but I think just looking at them heads up, I think Black Widow's effect is a much more guaranteed one right now. And I am definitely interested in considering Black Widow over Rockslide there. Alternatively, considering Black Widow over one of the 3-cost tech slots. There's a lot of flexibility in this list, and I think that's the important thing to understand. I haven't even talked about Shang-Chi, who obviously can go in a Zabu deck. There are so many options for these last 3 or 4 slots in the list that I think you can really customize this list to work for you in whatever metagame we find ourselves in. As far as Thanos goes, adapting to this new potentially Professor X-less world has sent me on a quest that I think Lockjaw, our good boy, can actually help us find. So Lockjaw we're going to use to help us fetch big guys out of the deck. Hopefully we don't have to use Professor X in order to make this happen. We're just going to get some big boys, we're going to play some big boys, and then we're going to use things like Killmonger and Death in order to win the Thanos mirrors. That is the general conception of how I view this deck right now. Previously, it was like, okay, this is doing this in order to win Thanos mirrors. It's also a Profex deck. But post-change, I think a deck like this, a Lockjaw deck, might be the best version of Thanos generally, because it is a little bit less reliant on Professor X. Now, don't get me wrong, this deck wanted Professor X. It was just kind of like, you know, your free little armor for your stones. Sometimes you take free wins off of that. You got to play both as a Lockjaw deck and as a Profex Blob deck, and that is a good thing. That said, I do think it's a little less hurt by the loss of Professor X than basically every other Thanos deck. You know what hasn't gotten nerfed? Phoenix Force. Phoenix Force hasn't gotten nerfed. And you know what might be good going into a future where a lot of the disruptive decks are a lot worse? Phoenix Force. Phoenix Force might be good when it's not getting Black Widowed twice a game. And I think that Phoenix Force is actually in a very unique situation as a deck where a lot of it remains unexplored. I know Jet has been pushing in the top 10 with various Phoenix Force lists. I found this one on Untapped, and what I ended up liking about it the most was the use of Eliath in order to sort of pair your giant vision, that is, you know, Phoenix Force Multiple Man, with a real endgame slam down kind of win the game card. Of course, you have your Deadpool backup plan. I am not a Phoenix Force expert. I just wanted to bring this deck back onto your radar as something that maybe should be considered, especially in an early metagame where people aren't going to know what to tech for. I think Phoenix Force could be a unique and powerful way to attack things. Of course, please do remember that all of these kind of decks and prognostications, they amount to guessing. As Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So I will, of course, be streaming later today in order to find out what the actual best decks are. Please join me, twitch.tv/KMBestMS. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of this patch in the comments below. Let me know what you're going to be playing, because honestly, like, I think I'm probably going to start with Loki and not change anything, but I really want to try to figure out if there's still an Annihilus bounce list out there, because that, like, it's my baby. I want it to be good. So let me know what you guys are going to be playing. I definitely have my own bias. I know where I'm going to start. I know what I'm going to be trying to do. Darkhawk stuff maybe with Leech, and Darkhawk stuff maybe with Annihilus. We're going to find out. But thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KM Best. Like and subscribe. I will see you in the next one.